Hello,
Hello,
church.
AC3. How are we doing?
It's Tuesday, the 20-something.
Yeah, 26.
Something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
So we're going to do something a little different. We're going to do a multi-installment version of, is it still the Creek this week?
Yeah, let's go. Let's go to Creek this week.
Yeah,
until
we haven't
it
gotten any
gets
better
changed by
suggestions.
revolt.
Thanks all our viewers.
Yeah.
You catch all
Dozens.
all the tens of you.
Yeah.
Tens and tens of them.
Yeah.
So we're trying something a little different. We're gonna do kind of a installment or
Yeah. A little longer form.
episodic.
Yeah, episodic. That's it.
Episodic.
Yeah.
So we're gonna talk about the 4 big initiatives that are really kind of driving all of the decision making and vision and the things that we're doing around AC3 for the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
From just before, back in the olden times, in the before times.
Yeah, in the great before.
In the great before, it was the fall of 2019.
Fall of 2019, we did the big church diagnostic.
So we had an outfit called Vital Church come in. If you weren't here at the time, kind of a consulting firm. Everybody filled out a big survey. Lots of people gave interviews. They spent a lot of time here interviewing leaders and whatnot. And kind of it was like a checkup.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And then they kind of said, well, here's where we think you are as a church in lots of different ways. And here's where we think maybe you'd want to consider making some changes.
Right.
And some of it was not a surprise.
Right. Some of it we'd actually done, kind of our own informal, audits and found some similar things.
Yeah. And maybe this is the case.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, okay, we were right about that. And then there were several things that were kind of like, oh, this is why you have somebody else look at the back of your head, right?
Yeah, right.
Because you can't see it so clearly.
And one of the biggest things is the seriousness with which, when you do your own internal audits, you go, oh, that we need to look at that. But when you pay someone, then it's like we got to really do something. And so I think that the seriousness of response was in part a way it differed to have an outside diagnostic team as opposed to our own internal evaluation tools.
And I think it also creates some trust on our part to say this is going to be objective.
Yes.
They don't have to say anything to make us feel good.
Yep.
They got a paycheck and
That's right.
we got nothing invested in this. Here's the truth.
Yeah.
And it's not like we just took everything and said, we ran it through our own process. We prayed about it, but we went into it really believing that God was going to use this and speak to us.
Yeah.
And so when all that was done, and it was difficult in some ways, it was exciting in other ways, encouraging and depressing and lots of stuff. When we processed it all, their plane was out of town, in the rearview mirror, and it was just left with us. We came up with kind of a 4-part initiative that we felt touched on really everything that they gave us. And then we said, okay, here's how we're going to try and address the issues they gave us our way.
Right.
And that was
COAT.
COAT, C-O-A-T.
Yeah. So there was probably, they boiled it down into many more evaluation points and then some suggestions for action. And so we thought just for the congregation to be able to put a real handhold on it, let's get it down to 4. And we squeezed some things under these, big headings. But COAT then represents 4 words that represents 4 different areas of change. And, sort of 2 degrees left or right, whatever, as course corrections for AC3. So the C is community. The O in COAT is outreach. The A in COAT is accountability. And the T in COAT is transcendence.
And so one of the things that complicated all of this is we received this information. It was November
of 2019.
2019. So we got that information.
Yeah.
It took some holidays came along. We needed to get the board, the staff, the elders, and people together to process it. And we got that done, by the first of the year 2020. And we had kind of got a plan together. And here are the changes we need to make. Ready, set.
Yeah.
COVID.
Yep.
And so that really had an impact on deploying these things because then, you all know in your lives when it comes to school and work and all the bets are off, right? You have to adapt to it. So
Well, and I think that before we talk about coat, we should talk about that. I think that that as we looked at it, AC3's, and our what spurred us into evaluation was like realities that were not just unique to us, and as we looked around the cultural landscape of churches overall, and especially in our evangelical ecosystem. We were seeing, a persistent plateau in attendance. That was one of the things. I mean, that's not the only thing that measures success. We know that, but it does sort of take a temperature, and so the great dechurching of America was something AC3 was tasting.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, then COVID happens, and we were just talking about this at staff today. Was that crisis? What was the two words? One was accelerates. Change is already in operation.
Right.
So we were obviously seeing a long extent, a protracted thing going on in the dechurching of America, and and then COVID hits, and it really accelerates things.
So it's almost like there was a conveyor belt of people slowly leaving the church from the 90s.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this goes back a ways. Slowly leaving the church. COVID comes along and just cranks it up.
Yes.
Right.
Right. Exactly. Speeds up that conveyor belt. And so what's going on there? Well, the church isn't hanging on to its own. What's going on there? Well, lots of maybe some internal things that you can look at. The church isn't doing a good job. We talk about catechizing our people, which is a fancy way of saying really getting them grounded in the basics of what it means to think like a Christian and live like a Christian. And maybe we're not doing a good job with that. But then at the same time, there's all these external forces. We don't invent them. We didn't invent a lot of the ideological dynamics that are going on outside in the culture that are putting huge pressure on Christians to defect.
Yeah, it's not my fault that there's church leaders across the country who are doing terribly immoral things and creating a terrible name for the church.
Puts a pall on everything.
It's not my fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. But yet our church is going to bear the impact of those sorts of things.
Exactly. And also on things that are coming from outside the church community, like from the intelligentsia, because it's like, it's a very simple way to think about this. Ideas that percolate in the ivory tower, that's where they start, and then they eventually trickle down. And once everybody thinks this way, usually the intellectuals were thinking that way 40 years ago.
Right.
And so the intellectuals were postmodern about 40 years ago, and that's when it was a big, sort of move. And now that postmodernism, that sort of, we're now no longer living in a Christian thinking culture. We're living in a post-Christian thinking culture, which, by the way, still retains a lot of stuff. Commitment to human rights and, compassion and mercy. This is all derived from the Christian worldview. But then generously seeded now with, evacuating, commitment to absolute truth and some of those sorts of things. That really affected AC3.
Yeah. So that's kind of the soil in which we see COAT grow. Community, outreach, accountability, and transcendence. And we're going to talk some more about that.